1390. I am excited, Angela.
I know you've been talking about this. Pastor Hannah
like
came in the studio. Yes. Came in the studio. Oh, my God. You got to read this book.
Well, there's a book out called A Chance in the World, and the author is Steve Pemberton, and we're excited to have him in the studio with us. Good morning.
Welcome to the John Hannah Morning Show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, the book says, An Orphan Boy, A Mysterious Past, and How He Found a Place Called Home. Tell us about you as a kid growing up. You were in foster care.
I was. Before I got to foster care, I lived with my mother for the first 3.5 years of my life. And that experience was actually best defined by the title of the book, which I did not come up with. Right. It was from the diary entry of a babysitter who was asked to drop me off. He saw the really desperate circumstances I was in, went home and wrote in his diary that this little boy didn't have a chance in the world.
Wow. And when you, as I read your book, come to find out your dad was African American and your mother was white.
Yes, yes.
Okay, and your mom had how many children?
There were 6 of us. 5 of us survived.
But you were the only one. You had a twin sister.
Yes.
Who died a couple of months?
A couple of weeks after we were born.
Right. And you were the only one that was, should I say, had some African American blood in you.
Yes, yes. Although throughout my childhood, I didn't know who I looked like. I'm very light. I have blue eyes. I clearly knew I was African American. Nobody around me looked like me, and I had this Polish last name of Klakowicz. So at every exactly, so at every turn, people are asking you, "Well, what are you, and where do you come from?" And the question always stung because I did not know.
So when I read your book and it talked about the foster parent family that you ended up with, you had one line in there when you talked about the gentleman, the father.
Yes.
And you said he lived in confrontation.
Yes.
I shut the book.
All the time.
He lived in confrontation. So talk about what it was like living in that home.
The thing that I remember more than anything else was the extraordinary fear. There was a time when the mental... the physical abuse, I could tough that out after a while, and I was so defiant. I just wouldn't cry, wouldn't do a lot of things. Right. But it was the fear, that day to day of not knowing what's going to happen to you today. How are you going to eat? How are you going to learn? Are you going to die today? And to live like that for over a decade.
And they would give you only a small portion of food, but then you would take food and hide it in the basement.
Oh, I was a thief, man. I don't mind telling you. That was very good, too.
Right.
But it was because of survival, though.
Yeah, he got in survival mode.
Yeah, I didn't have a choice.
Right.
I didn't have a choice. And these folks were not poor now. It was just their way of making certain that they controlled every element and dimension of my experience.
And one of the things as a child, you loved to read, so that was your escape. But then the foster mother wouldn't allow you to read in the house.
Yes. Or be seen reading, generally speaking. I had to read outside the house. I had to. It never stopped me, though. It just made me more defiant.
Because she didn't want you to be empowered.
Exactly. It was almost akin to, looking back on it, almost like a slave master's mentality, which is... keep this spirit tamped down.
So there was the verbal abuse, there was the mental abuse, there was the physical abuse, there was the starvation, it was all of that. The book is called A Chance in the World. And how's the book doing?
Very well, very well. It at last counted into a 3rd printing. It's been featured in People magazine and the top 500 books on Amazon, and all of a sudden it's become this viral thing that people in different parts of the world are reading.
How long did it take you to write the book?
It took me a solid year.
1 year.
A solid year.
That's really not long, though.
No, longer to live.
That's a good
longer
point.
to live, but shorter to write. I had a vision of it long before I wrote it.
Right. All right, so let's talk about this. So you in your book, you says your only escape is education.
Yes. And prayer.
And prayer.
Oh, yeah.
And I can talk about that part when this lady stood in the line. Okay, this is not Angela. Okay, so let's go back.
You're getting ahead of yourself, Pastor.
I am. So you graduate from high school and you go where?
Boston College.
And you've always wanted to go to Boston College, even as a kid.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, college to me was an escape. I really didn't even understand how foundational that was for a future. For me, it was just a way to escape. And I thought of it, well, gee, you go somewhere for 4 years and I don't have to live in this house anymore. Well, that could have been the moon, and I would have been trying to pursue the moon because it was going to be a release. But even long before I got to college, I knew that being a good student, particularly in elementary school, there were opportunities for me to be double promoted. For example, I was always the smartest kid in my class. I was frequently bored because it just wasn't a challenge to me.
And they never acknowledged that when you were in the foster home?
No, absolutely not. Although I'm hearing from my elementary school teachers and my classmates who always now, they suspected that something was unfolding. But what education did for me was it provided an insulation. So all these slings and arrows that are raining down on me from them wasn't something that they just didn't sink in, because I had all these things going on in the classroom, and my peers and my teachers made me feel that way, as well. So, and in fact, the real breaking point was, after years and years of living like this, was when I came home with the form to take the standardized tests.
And she took it.
And she told me she was not going to complete that for me to go to college.
Ugh.
And that's when I made a stand and said, I remember thinking, I'm going to die. I remember feeling that.
That is amazing.
It
that
is.
a kid has to worry about dying because they want to better themselves. All right, so you end up going to college, and then I want to talk about how you were determined not to continue the cycle that was in your family. You eventually found out who your mom was. You eventually found out who your dad was. But then you decide, when you have a family, what are you going to do different?
Well, I realized in the course of learning about my mother and father, they had come from extraordinary brokenness. I mean, it would have been easy to dismiss them as this undiagnosed, depressed alcoholic that my mother was, my father as a frustrated athlete who turned to a life of drugs and crime. And that would have been oversimplifying both their lives. They had come from fractured families, and they simply didn't know how to create something that was different, and they were hurting immensely so. So for me, as I got a little bit older, I thought that I had this ability. I thought I was man enough. I thought I was strong enough. I thought I was faithful enough to stop it. And that was what I wanted more than anything else. I believed that I had the power, that I could end all of it. I could literally stop this cycle.
Usually when those kind of situations happen, either you go to one extreme or the other. And you went the positive way, which is good.
I did, and yet I'm keenly aware that many people do not.
Right.
And it's the absence of a vision of another way of living. I think first you have to feel that you have a right to a different life, that God put you here for a reason. It wasn't to live this troubled existence. I certainly felt that from my parents as well. And I carry something of their life with me. I want to make certain that I live a life that shows that theirs wasn't in vain, and that means building a family of my own, and that future generations can build from as well.
Great. Let me give the name of the book again, Chicago. I really, really, really encourage you to get this book. It's called A Chance in the World. And I just want to let you know that this thing blew me out of the water. It blessed me. I have purchased it for several people, handed it to them that I know that came through similar situations. And I remember in one part of your book, and this is just amazing to me, how you were a lady stood in line to meet you, and she kept moving to the back, and she walked you and said, God's not done with you yet.
Right.
And here you are today encouraging so many people in ways that you could never imagine. So you are a survivor. And I just want to let you know, your book blessed me. I didn't go through anything like this, but I felt the pain, and I minister to people every day that have this pain. So you bless me, man, and God is not done with you yet. Wow! A Chance in the World. God bless you, my brother.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Wow!
Thanks for having me.
I'm like a little kid. This is a shame. $13.90.